Hello. Tonight you find yourself at the quiet beginning of everything, where two ancient rivers drift through a sleeping land, and where the first cities rise without urgency. As if time itself has chosen to slow down as you stand here. You begin to wonder how such a peaceful place could ever become part of something much larger and far more restless. You begin to notice the land unfolding around you in gentle layers, shaped by the slow and patient movement of water. The rivers curve softly through the earth, reflecting the pale light of early morning. A thin mist lingers above the ground, drifting lazily across fields that seem to stretch endlessly, as if the horizon itself is in no hurry to arrive. The light grows slightly warmer now, brushing the surface of the land with soft gold. You see patches of fertile soil darkened by recent floods, quietly nourishing rows of barley that sway almost imperceptibly. Everything moves with a kind of quiet agreement, like a morning that has collectively decided not to rush, which feels refreshingly unlike most modern Mondays. So, before you get completely comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy what we're creating here. And as you settle in a little deeper, you might like to share where you are in the world right now, and what time it is where you're listening from. There is something quietly comforting in knowing that while you are here, drifting into this story, others are doing the same, each in their own still moment. Now, slowly dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan, letting the steady hum of the air fill the room. And in that gentle rhythm, we quietly step into tonight's journey together. You continue forward, and the ground beneath your feet feels soft and full of life. Shaped by countless seasons of water rising and falling, the rivers move beside you with calm certainty, carrying fine silt that settles into the soul, feeding the land without ever asking for attention, much like a background app that somehow uses battery but never explains itself. In the distance, small city-states begin to appear, scattered gently across the landscape. Their walls are built from sun-dried mud bricks, low and simple, as though they were never meant to intimidate. Instead, they feel almost welcoming, like quiet reminders that not everything needs to be tall, complex, or particularly competitive to endure. You move closer to one of the settlements, where the quiet rhythm of life becomes clearer with every step. Farmers work the soil using simple, wooden tools, guiding them through the soft earth with steady, practiced movements. Their pace feels unhurried, almost timeless, as if the day unfolds naturally around them rather than being controlled by any strict schedule or MEASURED expectation. Not far away, small groups of animals graze calmly across open patches of land. Herders walk beside them with quiet attentiveness, occasionally guiding them with soft gestures or gentle calls. There is no urgency in their actions, only a quiet understanding that time here follows the turning of seasons, not the ticking of clocks or passing minutes. Along the river banks, narrow wooden boats drift slowly with the current, carried more by water than by effort. Traders exchange goods such as grain, pottery, and woven textiles with calm familiarity. Their interactions feel balanced and enforced, like a quiet conversation where no one interrupts. And nothing needs to be proven or rushed. The air feels still, yet alive with subtle sounds. Water brushes softly against the shore, and somewhere a distant bird calls, its voice echoing across the open space. It is the kind of sound that does not demand attention, but gently holds it, like a melody you barely notice until it is gone. You begin to sense that this world exists in a delicate balance. The rivers provide, the land responds, and the people adapt with quiet understanding. Nothing feels forced or strained, and there is a gentle harmony that settles over everything, as if each part of the landscape knows exactly where it belongs. One city draws your attention more than the others. It is known as Uruk, one of the earliest great urban centers. Its presence is subtle yet significant, like a quiet voice in a room that somehow carries further than all the others, without ever needing to raise itself. Within Uruk, you notice a soft structure guiding daily life. There are leaders and priests, but their authority feels woven into the rhythm of the city, rather than imposed upon it. People move through their tasks with quiet purpose, as though everyone has agreed, without discussion, to keep things gently in order. Nearby, a group of scribes sits with small clay tablets, pressing marks into the surface with careful precision. These markings form what will come to be known as cuneiform, one of the earliest systems of writing. It begins simply as a way to record goods and exchanges, which feels surprisingly relatable for something thousands of years old. Each symbol pressed into soft clay holds a fragment of memory, carefully shaped by steady hands. You notice how the marks are not hurried, each one placed with intention, as if preserving a moment that might otherwise fade. It feels like a quiet record of life, simple yet meaningful in its silent purpose. There is nothing dramatic in this act of writing, only a calm effort to remember what has been exchanged, grown, or lived. You sense that these people value continuity more than urgency, as though even the smallest detail deserves a place in memory, like saving a note you may never need again. As you continue to observe, you feel how little tension moves through this world. There are no visible conflicts or struggles, only the gentle rhythm of daily life unfolding. Everything feels suspended in a calm moment, like a pause before change, though nothing yet hints at what may come next. The rivers continue their endless journey, flowing past the fields, the cities, and the quiet lives within them. Their movement is constant, yet never hurried, carrying within the soft weight of time itself, as if they alone understand how everything will eventually shift, even if no one else does. You stand still for a moment, watching the water ripple under the growing light. The land remains calm, unchanged, and deeply at peace, and, as the rivers whisper quietly through the earth, everything continues just as it is, as though nothing has ever disturbed their gentle, endless flow. You remain within the gentle rhythm of this land, and as you continue observing, you begin to notice that beneath the calm surface, there is a quiet structure holding everything together. It is not loud or forceful, but it is present like the unseen framework behind a stage set that keeps the entire performance from quietly collapsing. At the center of each city-state, a king quietly presides over daily life. His presence does not feel overwhelming or forceful, but symbolic and steady. You sense he is seen as a bridge between the people and the divine, a role that carries quiet importance, and likely comes with responsibilities that never fully pause. Even at rest, not far from him, priests move through temple spaces with calm and deliberate steps. They oversee rituals, offerings, and sacred routines that unfold at a measured pace. Their actions feel practiced and careful, as though each gesture holds meaning, even if it appears simple to anyone watching from a quiet distance nearby. Their role feels less like control and more like quiet reassurance within the community. They maintain a steady connection between daily life and unseen forces believed to shape it. It is as if someone is always gently keeping everything aligned, like a calm presence ensuring nothing drifts too far from its intended place. The people themselves form the broad foundation of this society. Farmers, artisans, and laborers carry out their work with a rhythm that feels deeply familiar. Each task flows into the next without urgency, as though time here is not something to chase, but something that simply unfolds, much like a very patient cue. You begin to notice how land is carefully managed. Fields are divided, recorded, and assigned with a level of organization that feels surprisingly deliberate. Clay tablets keep track of ownership and yield, ensuring that resources are distributed in a way that maintains balance, even if it occasionally resembles a very early version of administrative paperwork. Taxes exist here, yet they move through the community with quiet regularity, other than pressure. Grain, livestock, and crafted goods are gathered and then redistributed with steady care. The process feels almost invisible, like a gentle system working in the background, supporting temples, leaders, and those in need without drawing attention to itself. You sense that most people rarely pause to think about this system. It flows beneath daily life, consistent and predictable, like a current that carries everything along without resistance. Only if you stop and observe closely do you notice how much depends on this quiet movement of resources across the land. The true strength of this world lies in its fertile land and steady rivers. Water nourishes the soul, allowing crops to grow with dependable rhythm. You can feel a quiet confidence in this abundance, as though the land will continue to provide, as long as its natural balance remains undisturbed over time. Yet, as you stand there, you begin to sense a subtle fragility within this abundance. The same rivers that nourish the land can also shift unexpectedly. Too little water brings drought, while too much can overwhelm the fields, which makes the system feel a bit like relying on weather forecasts that are occasionally optimistic. At best, the irrigation systems are carefully maintained, with narrow canals guiding water steadily across the fields. You notice the quiet coordination behind it all, as workers clear channels, adjust flows, and repair small breaks before they grow. It feels as though the entire society depends on these pathways. And in truth, they do, much like a system no one notices until it stops working properly. Beyond the boundaries of one city-state, others exist nearby, each with its own leadership, customs, and quiet sense of identity. They are connected, yet not fully united, sharing space without fully merging. It feels like a calm neighborhood where everyone remains friendly, but still keeps a polite distance, just in case something borrowed is never quite returned again. Trade flows between these cities with a steady calm. Goods are exchanged, ideas are shared, and relationships are formed without urgency. Yet beneath this cooperation, there is a quiet awareness that each city must look after itself first, which adds a subtle tension that never quite rises to the surface. Diplomacy here unfolds in a careful, measured rhythm. Agreements are discussed, alliances are gently suggested, and boundaries are acknowledged without ever becoming fully fixed or permanent. You sense it as an ongoing conversation between neighbors, one that never truly reaches a final conclusion. No one seems entirely certain where it will lead, yet everyone continues speaking with calm politeness, as if silence would change more than words ever could. You begin to notice that records of these interactions are kept with increasing care. Clay tablets preserve agreements, transactions, and even disputes, creating a quiet archive of relationships. It is a reminder that even in calm times, people feel the need to remember, perhaps because memory itself provides a kind of stability. One such clay record speaks of a quiet dispute between the neighboring city-states of Lagash and Umma, centered on fertile fields and access to shared water. It is among the earliest known territorial disagreements in human history, yet it unfolds slowly, without urgency, through careful negotiation that stretches across generations rather than erupting into sudden or dramatic conflict. The disagreement itself feels understated, almost gentle in its persistence. It resembles a long, quiet conversation about boundaries that are never fully agreed upon. Each side maintains its own understanding of ownership, returning again and again to the same question, not with anger, but with a calm determination that feels surprisingly familiar even in much later times. Despite this quiet tension, daily life continues without interruption. Farmers still tend their crops beneath the sun. Traders move steadily through the markets, and temple rituals carry on with their usual rhythm. Nothing in the visible world suggests that these small disagreements might one day grow into something greater, which makes them easy to overlook entirely. You stand once more beside the river, watching its surface remain smooth and undisturbed. The balance of power feels much the same, calm and steady at a glance. yet shaped by unseen currents below. These hidden movements quietly influence everything, guiding change without noise, like thoughts that shift slowly without ever being spoken aloud, and as the water continues to flow, reflecting the soft light of the sky, you sense that this balance, while peaceful, is not entirely still. It shifts ever so slightly, like a surface that appears calm, yet is always, gently, in motion. You remain by the quiet rivers, yet your attention begins to drift beyond the soft horizon, where another landscape slowly takes shape. It feels distant at first, almost like a thought you are not entirely sure belongs to you. But it grows clearer with time, as though something far away has begun moving gently toward this calm and balanced world. In that distant region, the land feels different beneath your feet. The soil is drier, less forgiving, and the air carries a subtle weight of scarcity. Water does not arrive as generously here, and asks more from those who depend on it, which gives the entire place a slightly more serious mood. You begin to notice that the people living there move with a quiet sense of urgency. Their settlements are closer together, and their resources feel carefully measured. It is not a place of panic or distress, but rather one of awareness, as if everyone understands that comfort here requires a bit more effort than usual. Over time, the population grows steadily, and with it comes a gentle but persistent pressure. Fields must feed more mouths, and water must stretch just a little further. The balance that once felt stable begins to shift, not dramatically, but enough to be noticed, like a chair that is just slightly uneven. As this pressure increases, small groups of people begin to move outward. They travel slowly, following rivers, valleys, and open paths, searching for land that offers a little more ease. Their movement feels natural, like water finding its way downhill. Guided more by necessity than by any deliberate plan, these journeys unfold slowly, and without chaos. Families move with care, carrying their belongings, their skills, and quiet hopes across familiar and unfamiliar paths. There is no sense of urgency or panic, only steady movement through time and space. It feels less like escape and more like gentle expansion, as though the land itself softly invites them to explore what lies beyond its edges. Within this changing landscape, a figure begins to appear in historical memory, though not with sudden prominence. His name is Sargon, and early accounts describe humble beginnings. Some traditions suggest he once served as a cupbearer, a trusted but modest position within royal circles. It is not the kind of origin story that usually predicts the rise of someone who will later shape entire regions. You sense that his rise is not sudden, but steady. He moves through the structures of power with quiet intention, observing, learning, and waiting. There is no dramatic moment of transformation, only a gradual accumulation of influence, like a small stream that eventually gathers enough strength to shape its path. Sargon becomes closely associated with the city of Akka, a settlement that gradually rises in importance during the 24th century BCE. Archaeological and textual evidence from later Mesopotamian king lists describes him as ruler of Akkad, a growing administrative center that begins to draw people, resources, and influence, not through sudden force, but through steady centralization. Historians later identify Sargon of Akkad as the founder of what is widely considered the world's first empire, dated around 2330 for BCE. However, contemporary records, such as fragmented cuneiform inscriptions, do not describe a single moment of imperial creation. Instead, they suggest a gradual accumulation of authority, where leadership expanded step by step across Sumerian city-states. You begin to notice how Akkad's influence extends outward through increasingly active trade networks. Archaeological findings show standardized weights, seals, and administrative tablets appearing across distant regions, indicating growing connectivity. These exchanges of grain, textiles, and crafted goods feel less like expansion in a single direction and more like a slow weaving of interconnected economic relationships. Small organized movements also become visible in historical accounts, including references to appointed officials and governors placed in various cities. These records, preserved on clay tablets, suggest a structured presence rather than sudden occupation. Groups travel with administrative purpose, establishing order and communication, which feels more like integration into existing systems than outright replacement. And as these developments continue, Akkad's influence becomes less a singular event and more a network of gradual alignments. The evidence found in inscriptions and later chronicles suggests that what is happening here is not a sudden beginning, but a slow layering of authority, carefully built through continuity, administration, and expanding regional cooperation over time. The surrounding regions respond in quiet and varied ways. Some welcome the growing connections, seeing opportunity in trade, cooperation, and shared routes. Others observe more cautiously, keeping a respectful distance while assessing change. Curiosity and caution exist side by side, never in conflict, like two travelers walking the same path, but choosing not to speak too closely. You begin to understand that no one here would describe this process as an invasion. It is seen, instead, as the natural expansion of another center of power, slowly extending its influence. The distinction feels meaningful, as though choosing the wrong word might disturb the calm rhythm that still governs daily life and mutual understanding. Even as Akkad continues to grow, the overall atmosphere remains remarkably calm. There are no sudden disruptions or dramatic breaks in daily routines. Everything unfolds gradually, like a long story told at an unhurried pace, allowing each detail to settle gently into memory before the next one arrives. You stand at the edge of this quiet transformation, observing how distant regions and familiar spaces begin to feel subtly connected. The rivers still flow as before, steady and unchanged in appearance, yet beneath their surface you sense another movement forming, a second current that travels alongside the first without disturbing its surface. These two currents move closer, not in opposition, but in parallel awareness. There is no collision, no moment of force or resistance. Instead, they begin to align, like streams meeting and continuing forward together, each carrying its own history, its own direction, into a shared and expanding path. Nothing about this convergence feels urgent or forced. The world remains calm, and the surface of life shows no visible disruption. Yet beneath that calm, the balance is slowly shifting, reshaping what once felt stable, like water subtly changing course while still appearing completely still to the eye. And in this quiet transformation, you realize that change does not always announce itself. It moves gently beneath familiar patterns, altering direction without breaking continuity. Until one day, you notice that the flow has already become something slightly new. Though everything still appears almost exactly the same, you remain within this quiet landscape, yet your awareness deepens gently, as though you are slowly uncovering the reasons behind its calm significance. Nothing here calls attention to itself loudly or forcefully, yet everything feels quietly valuable, like a place that never needs to prove its worth because it has always understood it. As you observe more closely, you begin to see how naturally this land connects distant regions. The rivers extend outward like soft pathways, linking settlements across wide spaces with an ease that feels almost effortless. Movement along them is not directed by signs, but shaped gently by flow, time, and necessity. It is not a sharp crossroads, marked by clear boundaries or loud exchanges. Instead, it feels like a quiet intersection where paths meet without interruption. People, goods, and ideas move gradually through it, guided by water and time, as though the landscape itself quietly encourages connection without ever needing to announce it. These waterways function like natural highways, carrying people, goods, and ideas from one place to another. Boats drift along their currents with ease, avoiding the need for long and difficult journeys over land. It feels like an early version of infrastructure, though without traffic jams or unexpected delays, which is quietly impressive. You begin to understand that this land does not isolate itself. Instead, it invites passage. Traders arrive from different regions, bringing materials, stories, and customs. Each arrival feels calm and unhurried, like a guest stepping into a familiar room, where nothing needs to be explained too quickly. Beneath your feet, the soul tells another part of the story. It is rich and dark, shaped by countless floods that have deposited layers of fertile silt. This steady renewal creates a reliable source of food, allowing agriculture to flourish in a way that feels both predictable and generous. Fields of barley stretch outward, moving softly in the breeze. You sense how important this quiet abundance is. It does not glitter or shine, but it sustains life with remarkable consistency, which, in many ways, is far more valuable than anything that sparkles but cannot be eaten. The rivers continue their steady motion, not only feeding the land, but also shaping how people move within it. Their presence reduces distance, making travel feel manageable rather than daunting. It is as though the landscape itself is offering guidance, gently suggesting the easiest paths to follow. You begin to notice how accessible this region feels from multiple directions. There are no towering mountain ranges blocking entry, no vast deserts demanding careful navigation. Instead, the land opens itself gradually, allowing movement without resistance, like a door that has simply been left ajar. This openness creates a quiet sense of possibility. It is not guarded or hidden, but visible and reachable. Anyone who follows the rivers or crosses the plains can find their way here, which gives the land a welcoming quality, even if that welcome is not always intentional. Interestingly, the value of this place does not lie in rare metals or precious stones. There is no abundance of gold drawing attention from afar. Instead, its importance comes from something far more subtle: stability, the ability to provide food, water, and continuity over time. You begin to realize that this kind of value is easy to overlook. It does not create excitement or urgency, but it quietly supports everything else. It is the kind of resource that becomes most noticeable only when it is absent, much like a reliable internet connection that no one appreciates until it suddenly disappears. As you observe the nearby city-states, you notice a curious architectural choice. Many of them do not build large, imposing defensive walls. Their boundaries exist, but they remain relatively open and lightly marked. It feels as though the people trust a natural balance between neighbors, one that does not rely heavily on constant fortification or visible displays of military protection. This absence of strong defensive structures reflects a broader belief in equilibrium. Each city-state is aware of the others around it, and while caution is always present, there is also an unspoken understanding that stability benefits everyone involved. It is not perfect harmony or complete trust, but it is enough to maintain a steady sense of calm coexistence across the region. You recall earlier disputes, such as those between Lagash and Elmo, which were recorded carefully on clay tablets rather than resolved through large-scale violence. These accounts suggest a preference for documentation, negotiation, and formal agreements. Even disagreements seem to follow structured paths, reinforcing the idea that balance, rather than outright dominance, shapes this quietly interconnected world. The more you observe, the more you understand that this land is not important because it demands attention, but because it quietly sustains life and connection. Its rivers, soul, and openness create a foundation that supports everything built upon it, without ever needing to assert itself. Yet within this quiet strength, there is also a subtle vulnerability. What is open can be entered, and what is accessible can be reached with ease. The same qualities that make this land peaceful and inviting also make it available to others. It feels like a shared space, gently welcoming, where movement across it requires little resistance or effort. You begin to sense that this openness is not immediately seen as a problem. It does not disturb the calm atmosphere or introduce visible tension among the people. Instead, it exists as a simple condition of the land, quietly accepted by all, remaining unnoticed in daily life until gradual changes begin to respond to it over time. The rivers continue their steady flow, the fields remain productive, and the cities maintain their familiar rhythm without interruption. Nothing outwardly shifts in a dramatic way, and life carries on as it always has. Yet beneath this surface stability, your understanding of the place deepens, revealing layers of meaning that were not immediately visible before. It is no longer just a peaceful region defined by balance and routine. It becomes something more quietly significant, shaped by underlying forces that extend beyond what can be seen. The land carries this subtle complexity without disruption, holding both calm and possibility together in a way that feels steady, yet quietly meaningful. And as you stand once more at the edge of the water, watching its surface move with gentle consistency, you begin to realize that this land feels less like a closed world and more like an open passage, a place that does not resist entry, but instead allows it, as though anyone, at any time, could simply arrive. You remain beside the quiet rivers, yet something subtle begins to change in the movement around you. It is not a sudden shift, nor anything that draws immediate concern. Instead, it feels like a new rhythm gently blending into the old one, almost indistinguishable at first, like a song where a second melody quietly joins without asking permission. Along the riverbanks, you begin to notice more boats than before. They arrive without urgency, gliding smoothly over the water, carrying goods from distant regions. These travelers come from Akkad, and their presence feels natural, as though they have always been part of this landscape, even if you do not remember seeing them here before. The exchanges between traders grow more frequent. Grain, textiles, pottery, and metals pass from hand to hand in calm transactions. Nothing feels forced or unusual. In fact, it all seems quite efficient, like a well-organized market that somehow avoids the chaos usually associated with such things, which feels almost suspiciously convenient. You observe how relationships begin to form through these repeated exchanges. Familiar faces appear more often, and trust develops gradually. It is not announced or formalized, but that exists in the quiet recognition between people who have traded enough times to no longer feel like strangers. Some city-states begin to lean slightly toward these new connections. They do not abandon their independence, but they start to appreciate the stability that comes with consistent trade and distant support. It feels less like dependence and more like convenience, though the distinction can be surprisingly difficult to maintain over time. In certain areas, agreements begin to take shape. These are small understandings, often informal, where Akkadian influence offers a sense of protection or reliability. The arrangements are not dramatic, and they rarely involve large commitments, which makes them easy to accept without much thought. You notice how these agreements resemble quiet partnerships. A city might receive assistance or assurance in exchange for cooperation. It feels balanced on the surface, like a fair exchange, though the long-term implications remain gently out of focus. Much like terms and conditions that few people actually read, language begins to shift in subtle, almost imperceptible ways across daily life. Akkadian words gradually appear within conversations, trade exchanges, and administrative record-keeping. This is not a replacement of existing languages, but rather an addition that blends into the linguistic landscape. The change unfolds slowly, like adopting a familiar phrase and later realizing you no longer remember when it first entered common speech. Cultural elements follow a similarly quiet and organic path of transformation. Styles of clothing, methods of organization, and small everyday habits begin to reflect influences originating from Akkad. Nothing appears forced or imposed from above. Instead, these changes spread naturally through interaction and convenience, as people adopt what seems useful or appealing, without considering how these small choices gradually accumulate into broader cultural shifts over time. There is no large-scale conflict marking this transition, and no evidence in surviving records of widespread battlefield disruption during this phase of Akkadian expansion. Archaeological layers from Mesopotamian sites show continued agricultural activity and stable settlement patterns. The land remains calm, and daily life continues uninterrupted, suggesting that political change occurred gradually beneath existing social and economic structures. On the outer edges of the city-states, historical inscriptions and administrative tablets indicate increasing Akkadian presence. Regions closer to Akkad show higher concentrations of standardized seals and official records, suggesting tighter administrative links. These areas function as extensions of influence rather than fully independent entities, reflecting a gradual integration process rather than abrupt territorial replacement or sudden occupation. The idea of control in this period appears soft and administratively embedded rather than enforced through visible force. Cuneiform records from Akkadian governors describe local oversight and tribute systems instead of constant military engagement. Authority seems to develop through bureaucratic alignment and repeated administrative interaction, making it effective while remaining difficult to perceive as direct domination. From a historical perspective, scholars know that this type of imperial structure under Sargon of Akkad relied heavily on communication networks, appointed officials, and economic integration, rather than constant warfare. Surviving evidence points to governance through familiarity and institutional presence. Over time, this created a stable but expanding sphere of influence that blended gradually into local systems. You recall that Sargon, now firmly associated with Akkad, begins to place trusted individuals in positions of authority within these connected areas. These governors do not dramatically change the structure, but they quietly represent a broader influence, ensuring that relationships remain stable and beneficial. This historical detail, though significant, unfolds without disruption. The presence of these governors feels administrative rather than intrusive, like an additional layer of organization that blends into what already exists. Most people continue their daily routines without needing to adjust very much. Trade continues to expand across the land, gradually linking more regions into a wider and more connected network. Goods move with greater efficiency, and communication between settlements becomes more steady and reliable. It feels like a system that is quietly improving itself over time, though the direction of that improvement is not always immediately clear or fully understood by those within it. You stand once more by the river, observing the steady movement of boats along its surface. Each vessel carries more than just physical goods, it also carries influence, ideas, and subtle shifts in balance between regions. Yet none of this appears in any obvious or dramatic way, which makes these deeper changes easy to overlook during everyday observation. The cities remain calm and unchanged in their outward appearance. Their walls still stand as they always have, and their people continue moving through familiar routines without interruption. There are no visible signs of tension or resistance, only the quiet continuation of life. In fact, everything seems to function more smoothly, leaving little reason for concern or questioning. And yet, as you observe more carefully, you begin to sense that something has quietly settled into place beneath the surface. The connections between regions feel stronger, the presence of central influence more consistent, and the overall system more deeply woven into daily life. It is a change that does not announce itself, but instead accumulates gradually over time. As the rivers continue their endless flow beneath the shifting light of the sky, you begin to realize that the boundaries between these once separate worlds are no longer as distinct as they used to be. In this quiet blending of regions, almost without notice, the lines that once clearly defined each place have already begun to soften and shift. You remain within this slow-moving world, and at first, nothing appears to change. The rivers still follow their familiar paths, the fields still respond to the seasons, and the cities continue their steady rhythm. Yet, beneath this calm surface, something has already begun to settle into place. like a decision made quietly in a room where no one raises their voice. There is a moment in time, round 2330 or BCE, that later observers will recognize as significant. Here, however, it does not feel like a moment at all. There are no sudden movements, no visible turning points, only a gradual adjustment that blends seamlessly into everything that has come before. You notice it first in the records, clay tablets, once marked with familiar names, begin to show subtle differences. The titles remain, the format unchanged, but the identities of those who hold authority shift quietly, as though someone has carefully rewritten a line without disturbing the rest of the page. The change does not announce itself openly. It appears quietly within administrative details, especially in the names of rulers now recorded as connected to Akkad. It feels bureaucratic rather than dramatic, like a system update applied overnight, where everything looks familiar on the surface, even though something essential beneath it has already shifted. The former kings do not disappear all at once. Some continue to exist in reduced roles, their authority softened into something closer to local leadership. Others gradually fade from official records, their absence marked only by empty spaces where names once were. That silence feels more final than any direct declaration or recorded ending. You begin to sense that power here has not been seized in a visible or forceful way. Instead, it has been absorbed through gradual alignment. The existing structures remain in place, yet they slowly adjust around a new center, as if the system itself has chosen to reorganize without dismantling what already exists. The transition feels less like a sudden replacement and more like a quiet reorientation. Everything continues to function, but the direction of influence subtly shifts. Authority becomes redistributed, not removed, creating a structure where continuity and change coexist without visible conflict or disruption across the administrative landscape. Sargon, now firmly established, is recognized with the title King of the Four Quarters. This designation carries a broad and measured weight, suggesting reach across directions rather than direct domination. It describes presence expanding outward in all directions, maintained without loud declaration, as though authority itself has learned to move quietly through distance. This recognition does not arrive with ceremony that you can see. Instead, it appears in inscriptions, in formal acknowledgments, and in the quiet consistency of how authority is referenced. It is a shift that becomes real not through spectacle, but through repetition. The cities continue their routines, markets open, fields are tended, and boats move along the rivers just as before. There is no interruption to daily life, no visible sign that control has changed hands. Everything continues, which makes the shift feel almost unreal in its simplicity. You begin to understand that this is how large changes often occur here. They do not disrupt the surface. Instead, they settle beneath it, becoming part of the structure that supports everything else. It is a change you notice only if you are paying close attention. In administrative spaces, the presence of Akkadian authority becomes increasingly consistent and structured. Official documents begin to reflect a more unified system with standardized seals, language, and record-keeping practices. Decisions across regions gradually align with a central direction, yet this alignment feels remarkably smooth, as though all previous developments had naturally been guiding governance toward this point of quiet consolidation. For most people, daily life continues without noticeable resistance or disruption. Agricultural cycles of planting and harvest remain unchanged, as do patterns of trade, rest, and local exchange. The identity of leadership, while evolving in records and administration, does not alter these fundamental rhythms. As a result, the broader political transition passes quietly through society, drawing little concern or interruption in lived experience. You notice how language continues to adapt. Akkadian becomes more prominent in official records, while older forms persist in daily use. This coexistence feels natural, like two currents flowing side by side, each influencing the other without forcing a clear boundary. There is no moment of finality, No single point where one could say everything has changed. Instead, the transformation exists as a series of small confirmations, each reinforcing the presence of a new order until it no longer feels new at all. You stand again beside the river, watching its surface move with the same familiar calm as always. It reflects the sky without hesitation, showing no sign of the changes unfolding across the land it silently passes through. The continuity feels almost intentional, as if the river itself chooses not to reveal what it carries beneath its steady flow. The idea of control in this world remains quiet and deeply embedded within everyday patterns. It is not displayed openly or enforced with visible force, but instead exists within administrative routines, in the names recorded on clay tablets, and in the subtle alignment of distant regions. Influence feels less like command and more like gentle coordination. Even the memory of earlier structures begins to soften with time. Without sharp or visible markers of transition, the past gradually blends into the present, leaving only faint traces behind. It becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish where one period ends and another begins, as history itself seems to flow rather than break into clear divisions. As the light shifts across the land and the day slowly progresses, everything remains calm and undisturbed. There are no sudden interruptions or visible disruptions in daily life. Instead, the land continues to breathe in its steady rhythm, holding both what has been and what currently exists within the same quiet and continuous space. You begin to sense that direction itself has changed, though only slightly. It is not something that can be seen or heard directly, but rather felt in the subtle adjustment of patterns and movement. Like a current turning beneath still water, the flow of influence gently alters the path ahead without disturbing the surface, and as the rivers continue their endless journey through the landscape, you realize that nothing here ever truly remains fixed. Everything shifts gradually, almost imperceptibly, shaping a world where change does not arrive loudly, but instead moves quietly beneath the surface, guiding everything forward in a direction that only becomes clear much later. You remain within the same familiar Mesopotamian landscape, where archaeological evidence confirms continuous settlement across the Akkadian and Sumerian periods. Yet something feels gently different, like waking in the same environment but noticing subtle administrative and cultural shifts. Rivers still move steadily, cities remain in their locations, but historical records suggest governance is now increasingly coordinated under Akkadian influence. In agricultural regions, cuneiform tablets from sites like Nippur show that farming cycles continued without major disruption during Akkadian rule. Farmers guided tools through irrigated soil, as they always had, supported by long-established canal systems. The continuity of agricultural output suggests that despite political centralization under Sargon, local subsistence rhythms remain stable and deeply rooted in earlier Sumerian practices. Along river routes, archaeological discoveries of standardized weights and administrative seals point to continuous and well-organized trade activity. Boats consistently transported grain, textiles, and pottery between major cities, such as Lagash, and Akkad. These findings suggest that commercial exchange remains stable across time layers, reflecting adaptation of economic systems rather than disruption or collapse under changing administrative authority. These patterns indicate that regional trade networks evolve smoothly while maintaining their core structure. Rather than being replaced, existing exchange routes were integrated into broader administrative oversight. The consistent movement of goods shows a sustained economic rhythm, where local and intercity commerce continued without interruption, preserving a calm and functional flow of resources throughout Mesopotamia. During periods of political transition, population movement also continues in a gradual and measured way. Settlement patterns show no evidence of mass displacement during Akkadian expansion. Instead, smaller migratory shifts appear toward emerging administrative centers. These movements resemble economic opportunity seeking rather than forced relocation, indicating that most communities remain anchored to long-established local geographies and agricultural lifeways. Those who moved did so within expanding imperial networks documented in Akkadian administrative tablets. These texts reference appointed officials and controlled regions, suggesting structured expansion rather than abrupt conquests. Movement appears gradual, integrated into existing systems. As individuals, followed administrative or economic pathways rather than fleeing conflict or instability across the broader Mesopotamian lands. Cape in bureaucratic spaces. Inscriptions from the Akkadian period show increasing use of standardized Akkadian language in official documentation. However, this transition is gradual, not absolute. Sumerian continues to appear in earlier administrative layers, indicating a bilingual environment. The shift reflects institutional adaptation over time, rather than immediate linguistic replacement imposed by sudden policy change. Despite administrative linguistic changes, everyday communication remains largely Sumerian in many regions. Excavated tablets and household records show continued use of older dialects alongside Akkadian. This bilingual coexistence suggests that cultural transition occurred unevenly, with formal governance adopting new standards while local communities maintain traditional speech patterns across generations. Religious practices show similar continuity. Across archaeological records, temple archives from cities like Uruk demonstrate uninterrupted ritual activity, with offerings and ceremonies continuing through Akkadian rule. Deities from the Sumerian pantheon persist, often integrated into Akkadian religious frameworks. This suggests adaptation, rather than suppression, maintaining spiritual continuity across shifting political structures. Within this religious stability, scholars note gradual reinterpretation of divine names and roles. Inscriptions show that Sumerian deities were sometimes identified with Akkadian counterparts, creating layered theological systems. This blending reflects cultural integration rather than replacement, allowing religious traditions to evolve while preserving core ritual structures that remain central to temple life. Children born during this period, according to demographic reconstructions, grew up entirely within Akkadian administrative systems. They inherited bilingual environments and standardized governance practices without experiencing earlier political fragmentation. And, for them, Akkadian influence was not a change, but a given condition, embedded in education, administration, and daily social organization from early life onward. Younger generations adapted naturally to evolving systems, as seen in scribal school tablets known as Edaba texts. These educational materials show structured training in both Sumerian and Akkadian writing systems. The curriculum reflects continuity and adaptation, preparing scribes to operate within a dual linguistic and administrative environment shaped by gradual imperial consolidation across the land. Historical evidence shows minimal resistance to Akkadian governance. There are no widespread destruction layers or signs of abrupt societal collapse in archaeological strata from this period. Instead, continuity dominates settlement patterns, suggesting that political transition occurred through integration, administrative restructuring, and gradual acceptance rather than large-scale conflict or disruption. This adaptation did not erase earlier traditions, as shown by continued presence of Sumerian literary texts preserved in later Akkadian contexts. Myths, hymns, and administrative formats persisted, sometimes copied or translated. Cultural memory remained embedded within institutional archives, demonstrating that earlier identities were preserved within evolving political frameworks rather than eliminated. One particularly significant example is the persistence of cuneiform writing itself. Archaeological findings confirm that while Akkadian became dominant in administration, the Sumerian script system remained in use. This continuity illustrates technological and intellectual stability, where writing traditions outlived political transitions and served as a bridge between cultural phases across centuries of Mesopotamian history. This continuity of writing is strongly supported by the discovery of thousands of surviving clay tablets from both Sumerian and Akkadian periods. Archaeological evidence shows a gradual evolution in script usage rather than any sudden replacement. The cuneiform system remained in active use, preserving administrative practices across generations, while political authority and spoken languages slowly shifted over time. The persistence of cuneiform writing demonstrates the remarkable stability of administrative knowledge systems in ancient Mesopotamia, even as governing powers changed and Akkadian became more dominant in official contexts. Scribal traditions continued with consistency. This allowed records, laws, and economic data to remain coherent across long historical timelines, bridging cultural transitions without breaking the underlying structure of written communication. You stand once more beside the river, a constant feature in Mesopotamian geography, still reflected in both ancient and modern archaeological interpretations. Everything appears visually unchanged, yet textual evidence reveals layered administrative evolution beneath the surface. Change has taken root in governance structures rather than physical landscapes, subtly reshaping how regions are managed. Over time, cities continue to function as they always have, supported by archaeological evidence of uninterrupted habitation layers. Daily life shows continuity in housing structures, pottery styles, and agricultural tools. Nothing appears to have collapsed or stopped functioning. Instead, adaptation occurs within existing frameworks, allowing societies to maintain stability while integrating new administrative and cultural influences. And as rivers continue their endless flow through the Mesopotamian plain, you begin to understand what archaeological history repeatedly confirms. Transformation here is not marked by sudden rupture, but by gradual layering. Life continues seamlessly, while beneath it, political and cultural structures slowly evolve, reshaping the region in ways that only become fully visible across long spans of time. You remain within this familiar lane, and as you continue to observe, a quiet sense of structure begins to settle over everything. It does not arrive suddenly or demand attention, but it becomes noticeable in the way things align more smoothly, like a room that has been gently tidied without anyone announcing they were doing so. The system of governance begins to feel more centered. Decisions seem to follow a clear path, moving outward from a single source rather than forming separately within each city. It is not restrictive, but it is more coordinated. As though many voices have agreed to follow a shared rhythm, you begin to notice how authority is now represented more consistently. Governors, appointed from the Akkadian center, oversee different regions. Their presence feels calm and administrative, like someone quietly making sure everything runs on schedule. Though thankfully, without sending too many unnecessary reminders, taxes continue to be collected, but now with greater regularity. Grain, livestock, and goods move through established channels, supporting the broader structure of the empire. It feels organized, almost predictable, like a routine that, once established, requires very little adjustment to maintain. This steady flow of resources supports not only local needs, but also the growing central power of Akkad. The city itself becomes a focal point, drawing wealth, attention, and influence. Yet even this centrality feels quiet, like gravity rather than force, guiding everything inward without visible pressure. You notice that laws begin to take on a more uniform shape. While local customs still exist, there is a growing sense of shared standards across regions. It creates a kind of consistency that allows different areas to function together more smoothly, which is surprisingly comforting for something so broadly applied. Roads and pathways become more defined, connecting cities and regions with greater ease. Travel feels more direct, and communication flows more steadily. It is not a dramatic transformation, but a gradual improvement, like upgrading from a slow connection to something slight, more reliable. Trade expands alongside these developments. Goods move further and more efficiently, linking distant places into a wider network. The markets remain calm and familiar, but their reach extends beyond what was once possible, creating a sense of quiet expansion without disruption. You begin to understand how Akkad now serves as the center of this network. It does not overshadow the cities, but it anchors them, providing a point of coordination that allows everything else to align. It feels less like dominance and more like organization, though the distinction remains subtle. Historically, this period is supported by archaeological and textual evidence showing the Akkadian Empire, extending its influence into regions of northern Mesopotamia and as far as areas of modern-day Syria, such as Ebla and Mari. Cuneiform tablets from these sites indicate administrative contact and tribute relationships, suggesting expansion through governance networks rather than abrupt territorial conquest in a modern sense. In contemporary interpretation, this process appears less as sudden expansion and more as the gradual stretching of administrative and economic connections, trade routes, military outposts, and appointed officials linked distant settlements into a coordinated system. Excavated seals and inscriptions suggest integration occurred through existing local structures, allowing Akkadian influence to spread through alignment rather than immediate replacement of regional authority. Within these connected regions, daily life continued with remarkable consistency. Archaeological layers reveal uninterrupted agricultural activity as farming communities maintained long-established irrigation systems and seasonal cycles. Traders continued using established routes, while households preserved familiar routines. Even under Akkadian administrative oversight, there is little evidence of widespread disruption to daily economic or social patterns. The broader imperial structure functioned more as a stabilizing framework than a disruptive force. In daily life, rather than imposing constant visible change, it operated through governance systems, taxation records, and clay tablet communication networks. This allowed local populations to maintain daily routines while gradually becoming part of a wider system of regional coordination and influence. You notice how stability becomes the defining quality of this time. There are fewer uncertainties, fewer disruptions. The systems in place function smoothly, creating a sense of calm reliability that settles over the land like a soft and steady presence. Even the temples continue their established rhythms, maintaining spiritual continuity within this gradually evolving administrative structure. Rituals proceed, as they always have, unchanged in form and cadence, blending naturally with the surrounding governance. It feels as though two layers of existence, spiritual and administrative, operate side by side, quietly interwoven without conflict, each supporting the other without disrupting the calm balance of daily life. The appointed governors carry out their responsibilities with quiet and steady efficiency. They oversee local regions, coordinate resources, and report information back to the central authority. Their work is not dramatic or visible in everyday life, but it remains essential to the system's stability. Like hidden mechanisms within a larger structure, they ensure that everything continues to function smoothly and without interruption. You stand once more beside the river, observing boats moving slowly across its surface. The movement feels slightly more purposeful than before, though it remains calm and unhurried. Each vessel follows its route as part of a wider network, contributing to a system of exchange and communication that extends far beyond what can be seen from any single point along the water's edge. Across the land, everything appears to respond naturally to this growing order. Fields remain consistently productive, cities continue their daily activity, and the overall flow of life remains uninterrupted. There is a quiet sense that each place has found its role within a larger framework, settling into a rhythm that feels stable, predictable, and quietly sustainable over time. Nothing about this structure feels forced or abruptly imposed from above. Instead, it appears to have developed gradually through connection, repetition, and adaptation. Over time, these patterns have shaped themselves into an organized system that supports rather than restricts daily life. This natural formation of order gives it a sense of quiet strength and long-term resilience. As the light shifts gently across the landscape, you begin to sense the deeper presence of this stability. It is not loud or visually striking, but it is always there, woven into every aspect of life. Like a steady heartbeat beneath the surface of the world, it continues without drawing attention, yet quietly sustains everything that moves within it. And as the rivers continue their endless flow, reflecting the calm sky above, you sense that this is a different kind of stillness now, not the untouched calm of before, but a new balance, quiet, structured, and deeply rooted in the gentle continuity of the. You remain within this gently ordered world, and as you continue to observe, you begin to notice that the changes that have settled into place are leaving quiet traces behind. They are not bold or dramatic, but they linger in subtle ways, like footprints that remain long after the person who made them has quietly moved on. The boundaries between the old city-states begin to soften, where once there were clearer distinctions. Now there is a gradual blending. It becomes harder to say exactly where one place ends and another begins, which feels less like a loss of identity and more like a gentle merging of spaces. You walk along paths that no longer feel confined to a single city's influence. Movement between regions is smoother, more natural, as though the land itself has decided that divisions are no longer necessary. It feels like a map that has slowly erased its own lines without anyone needing to redraw it. The economy begins to reflect this wider connection. Trade is no longer limited to nearby exchanges, but extends across larger distances. Goods move through broader networks, linking places that once operated independently, creating a system that feels more expansive yet still calm. Markets carry a wider variety of items now. You notice objects that seem to come from distant places, each one quietly telling a story of movement and connection. It is like browsing through a collection where everything has traveled further than expected. Though no one seems particularly surprised by it, cultural elements begin to blend in similar ways. You notice changes in clothing, in decoration, and in daily habits. These shifts are not abrupt, but gradual, as though people are gently adopting what they find useful or appealing without feeling the need to announce it. Language reflects this blending most clearly. Akkadian continues to grow in prominence, especially in official contexts, while Sumerian remains present in tradition and daily life. The two exist side by side, influencing each other in ways that feel natural, like two accents slowly becoming one. Architecture also begins to show subtle signs of change. Buildings retain familiar shapes, but small details reflect new influences. Materials, layouts, and decorative elements shift slightly, creating structures that feel both old and new at the same time. Religious practices continue, yet they too adapt gently. You begin to notice that some deities are recognized across both traditions, their identities merging or aligning. This blending feels less like replacement and more like translation, as though different names are being used to describe the same presence. Historically, evidence from Akkadian and later Babylonian texts shows that many Sumerian deities were integrated into the Akkadian religious system rather than being removed. Gods such as Inanna and Enlil continued to appear in inscriptions, but under Akkadian names or associations. This reflects a process of cultural syncretism rather than replacement, documented across numerous cuneiform religious tablets. This transformation is recorded in temple archives and mythological texts where divine roles remain largely intact, but are reinterpreted within a broader imperial framework. Ritual practices continue without interruption, suggesting continuity of belief. Rather than erasing older traditions, Akkadian rule incorporated them, preserving religious meaning, while gradually reshaping expressions of worship across Mesopotamian city-states over time. You begin to realize that these changes leave marks, not only in daily life, but in the physical world itself. The soul holds remnants of shifting practices, and the artifacts left behind carry traces of both traditions. Layered gently one over the other, clay tablets continue to record transactions, agreements, and events. Their markings reflect this blending, combining elements of language and administration from both cultures. Each tablet becomes a small record of transition, preserving a moment where two worlds quietly meet. These written records do not emphasize change. Instead, they present continuity. As though everything has always been this way, it is only when you look closely that you begin to notice the subtle differences, like comparing two versions of a document that appear identical at first glance. You walk through a settlement and sense how little disruption has occurred over time. Daily life continues with the same calm rhythm, and if anything feels different, it is only in subtle details rather than major structure. The larger picture of the community remains steady and familiar, unchanged in its overall shape. As if time has moved gently rather than forcefully, there is no clear sense of loss within this landscape. Nothing appears to have been removed or erased in a way that demands attention or mourning. Instead, everything seems to have been adjusted gradually, reshaped over long periods of time. This allows earlier forms of life and organization to remain present, quietly existing within the evolving structure without being completely displaced. You begin to feel that this land now carries multiple layers of identity, each formed through different periods of history. These layers rest gently upon one another, creating a depth that is not immediately visible on the surface, yet it can be felt in the atmosphere of the place, as though memory itself has been preserved within the structure of the land. The rivers continue to move through this layered world with steady and uninterrupted flow. They reflect a sky that appears constant, even as the world beneath them gradually changes. Their movement seems to connect all layers of time, carrying fragments of each period forward without pause, linking past and present in a continuous and quiet passage. You stand once more at the water's edge, observing how the surface of the river reveals only what exists in the present moment. Beneath that surface, however, there is a deeper accumulation of history. It feels like a gentle reminder that change does not always erase what came before, but often allows it to remain beneath what is newly formed. As you continue to observe, the land seems to settle into this blended condition where no single identity fully dominates. Instead, multiple histories coexist within the same space, quietly intertwined. The past is not gone, and the present is not separate from it. Together, they create a continuous flow of existence that feels both stable and quietly layered. And in this final understanding, you begin to see the world not as a sequence of replacements, but as a gradual accumulation of experiences. Each layer remains present in some form, even as new ones are added. It is a place where time does not divide sharply, but instead gathers gently, allowing past and present to exist together in calm continuity. You remain within this quiet and carefully balanced world, and for a time, everything continues as it has. The rivers flow, the cities breathe, and the rhythms of life move forward without interruption. Yet beneath this steady calm, something begins to shift again, not in a way that calls attention, but in a way that quietly changes the feeling of everything. At first, the change is almost imperceptible. The air feels slightly drier, and the soul seems just a little less forgiving than before. The rivers still move through the landscape, but their presence feels softer, as if they are holding back in a subtle way, noticeable only to those who have observed this land for a long time. Over the years, this gradual shift becomes more consistent and easier to recognize. Rainfall grows less reliable, and seasonal cycles that once felt steady begin to stretch and fluctuate. The land continues to provide what is needed for survival, but not with the same effortless abundance, creating a quiet and lingering sense of uncertainty. This subtle change settles into the daily routines of those who depend on the environment. Farming, trade, and settlement patterns slowly adjust to new conditions without dramatic interruption. Life continues, but beneath its surface lies a growing awareness that balance is no longer as stable as it once appeared. Even though everything still seems outwardly intact, historians in later times will suggest that a prolonged drought affected this region, contributing to the gradual weakening of the Akkadian Empire. Here, however, it does not feel like a dramatic event. It feels like a slow fading, like a familiar song becoming quieter without anyone adjusting the volume. In the fields, farmers continue their work, adapting as best they can. They adjust planting times, conserve water, and rely on knowledge passed through generations. Their efforts remain steady, though the results begin to feel less certain, like following a recipe that no longer produces exactly the same outcome. The irrigation systems, once so reliable, now require more attention. Canals must be maintained with greater care, and the flow of water feels less generous. It is not a failure, but it is no longer effortless. which introduces a quiet sense of strain into the system. At the edges of this world, new movements begin to appear. Groups from more arid regions start to drift inward, following the same patterns of necessity that once guided others. Their arrival is calm, unhurried, and without clear intention to disrupt. Though their presence adds another layer of complexity. These nomadic groups move with familiarity across open spaces, settling briefly, then moving again. Their lives follow a different rhythm, one that adapts quickly to changing conditions. Their presence feels like a reminder that not all stability is permanent, even if it often appears that way. Within the empire, the centralized system continues to function, but with subtle inconsistencies. Communication slows slightly, resources move less predictably, and the coordination that once felt seamless begins to show small gaps, like a pattern that no longer aligns perfectly. The governors maintain their roles, overseeing regions and reporting back to the center, yet their task becomes more complicated as local conditions vary and challenges increase. Their work remains steady, though it now requires more effort to achieve the same results. You begin to notice how the sense of certainty softens. Decisions are still made, structures still hold, but the quiet confidence that once defined this system begins to fade, replaced by a more cautious awareness of change. The people continue their lives with resilience. Markets remain active, families remain rooted, and daily routines persist. There is no widespread disruption, only a gradual adjustment to conditions that feel slightly less stable than before. Historically, scholarly evidence places the decline of the Akkadian Empire around 2150 BCE, supported by disruptions visible in settlement layers and administrative gaps in later cuneiform records. Archaeological data from Mesopotamian sites indicates changes in urban continuity and reduced central coordination, yet this process is not reflected as a single catastrophic collapse, but rather as a gradual weakening of imperial structures. Over time, instead of a sudden end, the decline appears in historical interpretation as a slow accumulation of pressures documented in both environmental and administrative evidence. References to drought conditions, regional unrest, and shifting settlement patterns suggest that the system gradually lost its earlier stability. Like many ancient transitions recorded in Mesopotamia, it unfolds quietly, where balance is eroded. Step by step rather than broken in a single moment, you sense that no single moment marks an end here. Historical patterns from Mesopotamian records suggest that political transitions rarely occurred as sudden collapses. Instead, there is a gradual movement from strength into decline. Where structures slowly loosen over time, it feels like watching a tide recede in stages, each withdrawal quiet, subtle, and almost imperceptible in its progression. The cities remain in place, as archaeological layers confirm continuous habitation across periods. Yet their connections begin to loosen, reflected in diminishing administrative cohesion found in later cuneiform records. The once tightly linked network of Akkadian governance becomes less uniform, allowing each settlement to gradually return to more independent rhythms, not through rupture, but through slow and natural separation. You stand once more beside the river, observing its steady flow through the landscape. Even in historical interpretation, rivers in Mesopotamia symbolize continuity despite political change. The water continues moving as always, but now it feels different. Shaped by unseen transformations in society, it carries less certainty of centralized order, yet maintains its endless forward motion without interruption. The land itself seems to respond subtly to these broader shifts. Environmental and archaeological studies suggest changes in settlement density and resource distribution over time, hinting at evolving pressures. It holds both the memory of earlier stability under centralized rule and the emerging reality of gradual decentralization, creating a quiet tension that exists without visible disruption or sudden collapse. You begin to understand that cycles in ancient Mesopotamia rarely ended in clear, defined moments. Historical evidence shows that transitions between empires and local powers unfolded gradually, often only recognized in hindsight. Changes in administration, language, and influence accumulated slowly, like seasonal shifts that only become obvious when viewed across longer spans of time. The rivers continue their endless journey through the ancient landscape, carrying with them a quiet sense of continuity and change. You sense that nothing here ever truly stands still. Everything flows, adjusts, and transforms under gradual historical forces, as reflected in clay tablets and archaeological remains that preserve the slow unfolding of time across generations. You remain beside the rivers of Mesopotamia, where archaeological evidence from Sumerian and Akkadian layers shows continuous habitation over millennia. As everything settles into a softer rhythm, you begin to sense the full historical journey not as isolated events, but as continuity. Clay tablets suggest governance, trade, and daily life flowed without sharp interruptions, forming one long evolving process. You recall the earliest settlements along the Tigris and Euphrates, where excavations at sites like Eridu show gradual urban development rather than sudden construction. The rivers shaped agriculture and early irrigation systems, confirmed by canal remains. Cities rose slowly, and people adapted to seasonal cycles, living within environmental rhythms that require observation rather than strict control or rigid planning. Over time, administrative structures emerge, as seen in early cuneiform records from Uruk. These texts reveal temple-based management of grain and labor rather than centralized bureaucracy. Leaders, priests, and communities function within interconnected systems, maintaining balance through redistribution and ritual organization. Archaeology suggests this order evolved gradually, reflecting adaptation rather than imposed structural design from a single moment. You remember the rise of Akkad, documented in king lists and inscriptions attributed to Sargon of Akkad, rather than abrupt transformation. Evidence shows expansion through administrative integration and trade networks. Akkadian influence spread through appointed governors and standardized seals found across Mesopotamia, indicating coordination rather than sudden replacement of earlier Sumerian civic structures. Control shifted quietly, as reflected in bilingual tablets where Sumerian and Akkadian appear side by side. Administrative records show gradual linguistic transition rather than immediate change. Names of rulers and officials evolve over time, suggesting assimilation into existing systems. Historical data points to continuity in governance mechanisms. Even as political authority reorganized under Akkadian central influence, daily life continued largely unchanged, as shown in agricultural records and household tablets from multiple city-states. Farmers maintained irrigation systems along the Euphrates, and trade goods moved through established routes. Archaeological layers reveal stability in settlement patterns, indicating that economic life persisted despite shifting political authority. With communities adapting naturally to evolving administrative frameworks, resistance appears minimal in surviving historical records, with few indications of widespread conflict during early imperial integration. Instead, texts emphasized taxation, redistribution, and administrative correspondence. This suggests transitions occurred through institutional adaptation rather than violent disruption. Change accumulated gradually, embedded in bureaucracy and communication systems rather than marked by abrupt societal rupture or collapse. The land preserves these transitions in layered archaeological deposits. Excavations reveal overlapping construction phases rather than complete destruction between periods. Mudbrick architecture was often rebuilt on existing foundations, symbolizing continuity. Each layer reflects adaptation, where earlier cultural and political elements remain physically and historically embedded within later developments, creating a stratified record of long-term transformation. Cities such as Ur, Lagash, and Akkad reveal evolving boundaries in archaeological surveys across successive layers of habitation. Urban centers shifted in political and economic prominence over centuries, yet rarely disappeared entirely. Excavated remains suggest continuity of settlement, where cities adapted to changing circumstances rather than collapsing completely, maintaining their presence within a slowly transforming Mesopotamian landscape. Their identities gradually merged through sustained trade networks, administrative coordination, and shared religious practices documented in cuneiform records, material, culture, including pottery styles, cylinder seals, and architectural forms, indicates cultural blending rather than full replacement. Archaeological evidence points to interconnected regional development where shifting political control influenced expression, but underlying urban continuity remained stable across changing historical periods. Rivers remain central throughout, as geological studies confirm stable watercourses guiding settlement placement. The Tigris and Euphrates provided continuity even during political transitions. Ancient irrigation systems, visible in satellite archaeology, demonstrate sustained agricultural reliance. These waterways functioned as enduring frameworks, supporting civilization regardless of changing rulers, reinforcing environmental stability amid historical transformation. Power, as interpreted through Mesopotamian inscriptions, behaves like an evolving system rather than fixed authority. Kingship lists show succession without clear ideological breaks, suggesting legitimacy adapted over time. Influence moved through administrative networks, taxation systems, and military organization. Historical records portray power as fluid, shaped by geography, economy, and institutional continuity rather than singular domination events. The Akkadian Empire, once expansive under Sargon and his successors, gradually weakened around the late 3rd millennium BC. Evidence from Tel Leland and other sites indicates environmental stress and reduced central control. Administrative records become less frequent, suggesting decentralization. Yet cultural and linguistic traces remain, showing persistence even as political structures slowly lose cohesion over generations. This pattern is not unique in Mesopotamian history. Archaeological sequences across multiple periods reveal cycles of rise, integration, and gradual fragmentation. Each system builds upon previous foundations, preserving administrative knowledge and cultural memory. Change operates cumulatively, where new structures emerge from existing ones, maintaining continuity even as political identities shift across time. Through all of this, populations continue daily life with remarkable resilience. Evidence from household artifacts and burial sites shows stable domestic practices. People farm, trade, and worship according to long-standing traditions. Their lives are shaped by larger systems, yet remain grounded in routine. Continuity exists at the human level even when political frameworks evolve above them. As evening light settles over the ancient landscape, stratigraphic evidence reminds us that time here is layer, rather than linear. Shadows stretch across ruins that once served multiple civilizations. The river reflects this continuity, carrying sediments of past eras. In this quiet convergence, history feels less like disappearance and more like accumulation preserved within the earth itself. The land grows quieter still. As distant sounds slowly fade into the background of evening, silence settles across the landscape, not as emptiness, but as fullness, where everything that has happened seems gently suspended. It feels as though the world is resting, holding its memory softly within the calm air that now surrounds everything. Night begins to arrive, without urgency, spreading gradually across the sky like a slow breath. Darkness deepens above the ancient land, and faint stars appear one by one. Cities, fields, and rivers rest beneath this wide expanse, their forms softened by shadow, as if the entire world has been gently wrapped in stillness. And as this quiet deepens, you no longer feel any need to follow the world's movement. Everything seems to drift gently on its own, as if time has lowered its voice. The rivers continue their steady passage, carrying silence as much as water, while the land holds its long, quiet memory without resistance. Time moves forward softly, like breath fading into sleep, and everything stays gently connected in a calm rhythm, with nothing demanding attention or needing change. Only a quiet continuity that slowly dissolves into rest. The script comes to a close. Thank you all for listening.